when you hear professional organizer, your favorite reality TV shows about pack rats and hoarders may come to mind. Professional organizers help those people, but there's so much more that profession can offer. Organizers can help those of us too that are too busy, too confused, too tired, too stressed to deal with whatever is cluttering ourselves, our lives in general. We are excited to have today an expert in this subject. We've invited Jenny Abrams of Abrams Home Solutions to join us today and talk about what services a professional organizer can really offer. And we'd like to welcome you, Jenny. And if you would, tell us a little bit about how you got into this and a little bit about your background,
Well,
please.
thank you. Thank you so much, Kathy. I'm so excited to be here today.
Yeah.
So I'm a professional organizer, as you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
I am trained through NAPO, which is the National Association of used to be professional organizers. They changed it now to Productivity and Organizing Professionals. Very long name.
Okay.
And I have a certificate in residential organizing through them. I'm a member of both national and the Chicago chapter. So pretty active and continuing my education in the industry.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to that, I was a social worker for 16 years. So worked in 2 different hospital systems and helped people with a whole variety of resources and helping them get back on their feet during difficult times and transitions. And that kind of paved my way to getting into the professional organizing industry.
That's wonderful. So, some of the challenges that face individuals that need help from professional organizers, you had talked to a lot of people and understood kind of the background, how maybe they got to having this need, I'm guessing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mostly worked with outpatient oncology patients. So people coming in for chemotherapy and radiation and doctor's appointments. And I found that certainly some of them went on to lead very fruitful and fulfilling and productive lives, but there was a segment that unfortunately declined.
Yes.
And as they declined, if they were organized, some of those systems start to fall apart. And if they weren't organized to begin with, it got even worse.
Out of control.
Mostly just because of fatigue and limited mobility. And, for other reasons, they weren't able to stay on top of being organized, and so that led to clutter in their home. It led to disorganization with insurance papers or medical papers.
Yes.
It led to confusion sometimes with their family members who needed to step in and take care of them. Sometimes some safety concerns if things weren't being put away. So I felt when I started in this industry that I really wanted to work with people, really no matter what their age, but going through, life circumstances and transitions.
So for those our listeners that maybe don't know what a professional organizer covers, can you kind of give us a background there of how that works?
Sure. So it's a very wide range in terms of different niches that people decide to specialize in. For the most part, we work with people on organizing 3 different areas, either objects in their home, so physical, things in their home, or paper. A lot of professional organizers specialize in helping people process their paper and maintain a system for filing their paper. And then some organizers focus more on time management and productivity. My area really delves more into organizing objects, organizing spaces in people's homes, and organizing paper. So I don't delve too much into time management and productivity. I kind of focus on the other 2 areas.
Now, so we see a lot of homes where the mail is just kind of stacks up. In our own home, the mail sometimes stacks up.
Yes. There's such an influx of paper in our lives through mail, through printing things off of our computer. If you have kids like I do, they just bring home mass amount of paper every day from school. We bring it home from our jobs. So if you don't have a system to kind of, have a place where it comes in, a place where you process it, a place where it goes out, and, a zone as to where you are going to maintain the different types of files you have. And if you don't stay on top of all of that on a regular basis, it can become very overwhelming. And unfortunately, if somebody is dealing with a medical condition, if they're fatigued or whatever else is going on, they just don't have the capacity to deal with it.
Exactly.
And it builds up. Or, what I found when I was a social worker was people were really intimidated to open some of that mail. They didn't understand it. The medical bills confused them, the insurance information, financial information. So it was easier to just let it stack up than open it and figure out how to deal with it. And there are ways to even reduce the amount of paper that comes into our home to try to help, get that even under better control. But yes, dealing with that, no matter if you're healthy or going through an illness, no matter what age you are, it's something that everybody deals with.
Now, if someone, I would assume if someone sort of has dementia, that even kind of complicates it just a little bit.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, if you're not remembering where you place things and how to file things, it can become very cluttered, very disorganized quickly. And then again, when family members need to step in and help take care of that individual, if they can't find things, they're kind of stumbling around too. And that can mean missed appointments. It can mean missed medications, more sickness, more confusion. And obviously that leads to a whole host of other problems. So, maintaining a system is really important for our quality of life.
So going back to kind of your services on objects, what kind of when you first go into a home full of objects, kind of how do you sort that out, what to do?
Right. So I always start with what the person's goals are. So some people are staying in their home. Their goal is not to move or downsize. They just need to make better use of the space. They maybe don't know how to use the vertical space, how to use the walls, what types of products they could introduce into the space to make it more efficient and to store things easier and create homes for their items and categories of items. So it's really kind of providing them with a system and a structure. For other people whose intent is more to move or to downsize, we're looking at their objects in a different way. We're looking at what they're going to keep, what they're going to disperse. And if they are going to disperse items out of the home, how are they going to do it? Are they going to try to sell things? Are they going to donate things? What are the different avenues? Because sometimes if people have collections or inherited furniture or other household items, they're not sure how to get rid of them. They're not sure what the value is. So I always start with what are your goals, short and long term? What's your timeline? What's your budget? And then we put a plan together based on all of those factors.
So if kind of your client and their family is sort of starting to make this decision to downsize, are there kind of steps you follow?
Yes, absolutely. First of all, you always want to start early. Nobody likes working on a tight time frame.
Right.
So I always tell people, start early, give yourself a lot of time. Work during your best time of day. Some people are morning people, some people are afternoon people. So work within what you know is your best time of day. And plan it out. Break your project down into manageable chunks. Do it one room at a time. One closet at a time. Don't look at your house and in the entire entity because it's too overwhelming.
So it's segmented.
If you break it down and you do one room, one closet, one space a week, that seems much more manageable. It's also really helpful if you know where you're going to. Sometimes people put the cart before the horse and they start downsizing, but if you don't know where you're moving and you don't know what kind of space you're going to have, it's hard to know how much is going to fit. And so it's really helpful to make the decision first. What type of home you're going to be moving to? Is it going to be senior living? Is it is it going to be a condo or ranch? What kind of space are you going to have? Because then we're going to know how much we can keep and how much we're going to be discarding. But I always tell people to focus on what you're keeping because a lot of this is a very emotional process for people. It's been years of memories, years of living in their home. Every corner holds a memory and every, object holds a memory. We're very sentimental about things. And so I tell people, let's always focus on what we're keeping. Let's not focus on what we're discarding. It really turns it into more of a positive time of their life instead of the overwhelming, stressful transition. It opens it up to what are the opportunities for you.
So are there any additional tips that you could share on about the stuff that you're going to relocate, but not with you? Let me say, better than purging, maybe.
Yes.
Then are the other tips to follow?
Sure. Well, one thing is to recognize that we all infuse our feelings and our sentimental thoughts onto objects. And objects are, they're simply an object. They don't have feelings, but a lot of times we put our own feelings on them because of our memories or the person who gave it to us, or the moment of when we purchased the item. And so we need to be very cognizant of that, and realize that just because we decide to let go of that item doesn't mean we're letting go of the memory. That always stays with us. And so that's one thing I talk to people about. I talk to them also about what is the replacement value of the item in terms of time, energy, money, if you needed to replace the item. So it's very different to replace a bread maker. Maybe you haven't used it in 10 years. You decide to part with it. If you really want it back, it doesn't take a whole lot of time, energy, and money to get it back. Whereas a family heirloom or something that, maybe you bought on your honeymoon in Italy 50 years ago is a whole nother story. So we really, we focus on what's the replacement value, how much do you love and use the item. And, it's a little cliche, but really surrounding ourselves with the things that mean the most. And saying goodbye to some of the things that don't. Having some closure. You can say goodbye to the item. You can thank the item. If you're really conflicted, you can box up a select group of items for 3 or 6 months. And if you don't open up that box, you're ready to let those things go. And also you can give yourself some rules, I think, when you start out the process. So knowing, for example, you're only going to save clothes that you've worn in the past 12 months.
Oh, that's good.
You're only going to save books or magazines that you've read in the past 3 months. Because what happens when we start going through a lot of our stuff is we have to make a lot of decisions, and we get decision fatigue. We get tired of making the decision. But if you give yourself some guidelines going in, you're basically just following the rule then, and you're not getting fatigued from making so many decisions. The rule is making the decision for you.
It's less emotional.
Yes.
Each transaction of deciding.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So it makes it a little easier for the person to, move forward.
Now, if someone's deciding to not move but stay in the home, do you have any tips for helping them organize and keep it safe?
Yeah, definitely. So one thing I would say is, depending on your flexibility, your mobility, or your safety in your home, really think about storing things at a safe level. Not putting things up too high that you would have to get up onto a step stool to get them down, especially if you live alone. And not putting things too low to the ground if you have trouble bending over or, squatting down. So really placing things at eye level. Every day, putting things away back to where they belong. Sometimes we have objects that are guests and visit other rooms in our house, but like all guests, they need to go back home. So at the end of the day, I encourage people to spend 20, 30 minutes just putting things back where they belong. Because if they're back where they belong, there's less clutter. You remember where they are. Everybody can find them easier. So it's really staying on top of it on a regular basis, and then, creating effective homes for your items, zones, and putting things in an area where you can get to them without compromising your own safety.
Now, in our home, some of the guests like to congregate on the kitchen table.
Absolutely.
And around recliners.
Yes, that's what happens. There's always those common areas that tend to get cluttered. And for sure, the kitchen is one of them. Entryways where we're coming in and out from the garage.
Drop stuff off.
Typically another one. So if we can put in effective products, a catch-all for some of those things, a bin, hooks, anything like that, where we can put the stuff into something, onto something, hang it onto something, rather than the floor or the counter. That's always a better way to go.
So, are you noticing over the recent years there's some neat products that maybe someone doesn't realize that's out there that could help organize?
There's tons of products out there. Yeah. I mean, I'm obviously a huge fan of the Container Store. I'm shopping there all the time, but people can find things at Target and Amazon, the dollar store. It's really about the right bin or container for the objects you're trying to contain and for the space. So sometimes, if the objects are too big or too small for the container, it's not right. Or if the container doesn't fit the dimensions of where you're trying to store the items. Yeah, so you really need to think about the dimensions and what you're storing. You don't want to store a whole bunch of little things in a big bin. You want to make sure the container is an appropriate size.
I was just going to say, because I'm kind of fascinated by this a little bit. The containers, I find that a lot of times getting a container that's clear is helpful, because if you pack things in a box, or then sometimes you forget what's in that box, and it makes you in your mind not want to open that box again. But if it's something you can see through the open, clear container, then you're more apt to maybe use it again because you know where the stuff is, right?
Absolutely. I'm a big fan of clear containers, always. Storing things in cardboard is never a good way to go. You can't see into it, and cardboard, especially in a basement where there's moisture and bugs, does not fully protect the items that you're storing. So you need to take that into consideration too. Now, if you're trying in a garage, maybe you'll pick some opaque bins, because you don't want it to look messy, and you want a more of a neat appearance. But definitely in our day-to-day lives, a bathroom, a storage room, a laundry room, under the kitchen sink, clear is the way to go, so you can see what you have. You can see when you're running out of something. Labeling your bins. I label everything. You're more apt to return something to its right place if it's labeled. You're more likely to store things in the correct place and know where to get them if they're labeled. So always recommend clear bins. And if you can get away with it, not having too many things stacked on each other, with lids. So if you can have more open, accessible bins that you can just reach in and grab something, again, you're more likely to keep the space organized than if you have to put lids on everything and stack them and take off 2 bins to get to the bottom bin that you want to put something back into. You're more likely to just throw it on top of the top bin, right? If you're running short on time.
I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah. So if you really need to stack, that's okay in a garage or a storage area. But in other areas of your home, try not to use so many lids and stack, and have things that are more open and accessible.
Cool.
The more stacking that you do, or the more mental or physical hassle that you make for yourself, probably is the less likely you're going to be going back into that to try to sort through it.
Absolutely. So the system that you set up will start to backslide, and you'll start to see that clutter build up again. So for more of a long-term success, making it easier on yourself to put things away is always the way to go.
Yeah.
More success long-term.
Now, how about what does it mean to create an organized legacy, and why is that important?
So this is something I actually feel super passionate about. I've given a lot of presentations on this. And again, going back to my social work days, I found that when people were disorganized with their estate planning, their insurance paperwork, their healthcare documents, when their family members needed to pick up the pieces, and it's not always family, maybe it's a friend, maybe it's a caregiver,
right.
Whomever it is, if they can't follow what you have or haven't set up for your life legacy and your plans, they maybe can't follow through on what your wishes would have been. So setting up your legacy means telling people about the important objects in your home, why they're important to you, what the story is behind them, sharing that information. So if something happens to you, that object can go on living that life, and the other person who's coming in knows what it meant to you and why they would want to keep it, versus the random item that you picked up at a garage sale that they don't know the difference, right? Between that and the item you picked up on your honeymoon. So it's the objects in our home, but it's also making sure that you've shared with people what your estate documents are, what your financial situation is, what your insurance policy is, if you have a safety deposit box, if you have long-term care insurance. So telling people that you have this stuff and where you're storing this information is so critical so that they can access it in an emergency. And unfortunately, even on a personal side, I've been on the receiving end of that, where my mother-in-law passed away unexpectedly. And even with our prompting, did not share some of that information. And we had to kind of go on a scavenger hunt in her house. And when you're overwhelmed and stressed and emotional dealing with the loss of a loved one or the sickness of a loved one, the last thing you want to be dealing with is figuring out, what's their health insurance? Do they have life insurance? Do they have long-term care insurance? How do I access that policy? How do I access that information? And if I find a copy of a will, is that the most recent copy or is that an old copy? So making sure that you as an individual inform whoever is in your life of this information so they can carry through your wishes and make sure that everything you've set up for yourself happens the way you wanted it to happen. That's what it is to have an organized life legacy.
Excellent, excellent. So could you dig a little more into this paperwork thing, and any more tips you can give on managing this paper?
Yeah. So when you think about your paper, first of all, divide it into 3 categories. Action items. Those are the items that you need to do something with in a prompt way. So you need to call someone, you need to fill something out, you need to pay a bill, you need to send an email, you need to RSVP to an invitation. Those are your action items. The next category would be your reference. So those are papers that you need to refer to for contact information, a schedule, something that you look at but not as frequently as your action items. And the last category are your archive items. So those are the papers such as the deed to your house, the title to your car, your marriage license, your birth certificate, your social security card, your taxes, the stuff that you have to have but you really never look at. Those are your archive papers. So you want to make sure you have 3 distinct categories, and then you're organizing them and placing those categories near you based on their level of urgency and how often you access them. So for example, your archive items that you look at very infrequently can be stored somewhere in your home, in another room, but it doesn't need to necessarily be at your desktop. The items at your desktop should be your action items, the things that you're actively working on.
What's your view on scanning stuff?
Big proponent of scanning, big proponent. So first of all, try to reduce the amount of paper that comes into your life. Like, don't print everything. You really think about, does this information exist elsewhere? For example, I work with people and I come into their homes and I find utility bills going back 12 years.
There you go.
And that information exists somewhere else. You could call the utility company and get that. Same thing with financial documents. They send you the stuff every quarter, and really whatever they sent you a year ago is old information at this point. You don't need to save that statement, and you can access it online. So really thinking about, does this information exist in another way that I can access it? Or if it doesn't, can I store it electronically instead of keeping everything in paper form? Now, that being said, you can still have digital clutter. So you need to make sure that even if you are saving things digitally, you're still organizing them in a way that you can recall the information. So what we call a naming convention, making sure that you name them and save the file in a consistent manner so that you can recall that data when you need to.
So should the name involve a time, a date?
Absolutely.
And description?
Yes. So if you put the date first and then the item, so if you really do want to save every ComEd bill, you would put October 2019 ComEd, November 2019 ComEd, so that when you're looking at it on your computer, it's all in a row, and you then can recall the data, very easily. So digital clutter does exist, just like physical clutter.
Sure. So an email, having some folders set up in the email to drag stuff over to?
Yes, absolutely. And I do tell people too, don't have too many folders. Don't get super specific. Broad categories are better. because otherwise, if you get too detailed on too many categories, you can't remember how you're
Where to
saving
put them.
things and where you're putting them. And then it could go into 2 different folders and you're not sure which one to put it in. So, 10 folders or something is appropriate, but try to have them be relatively broad. You don't want to get too specific.
That's a good suggestion.
Yeah.
This is all food for thought.
Yes.
Yeah.
She's speaking to me, I think.
We're all picking up some good tips
Yes,
today.
we are.
Yeah.
We are.
Well, I'm thinking of office organization.
Absolutely.
Because I've got so many, like sometimes I don't know where to put, which folder to put certain things in, and I probably have too many folders. So that's good advice when it comes
Scale it down.
Yeah.
Scale it down. Absolutely. And really think twice about what you're saving. Because like I said, if it exists in another capacity and you can access it online, you don't necessarily need to keep it. That goes for healthcare information too. People keep every after visit summary that they take home from their doctor. You don't need it. Every time you go, your meds change a little, your blood pressure changes, your blood work changes. So unless you're tracking a specific condition and you want to see the results over time, that's one thing. But for the most part, if you really needed that information, you could call your doctor and get it.
So we forget about this information existing elsewhere, don't we?
Yes.
Yeah, cool. So before the show ends, we want to get your contact information out to our listeners. Could you share that?
Yeah, absolutely. So my website is abramshomesolutions.com, and that's spelled ABRAMS, homesolutions.com. I'm located in Schaumburg, but I serve the Chicagoland area.
Yes.
I have a Facebook and Instagram page, Abrams Home Solutions. And I don't know, do you want me to give out my phone number?
It's up to you.
Well, it's on my website.
Yeah,
so my website does provide my phone number and email address. So I probably direct everybody there. And from there, they can get all the information they need.
So if someone has been touched by this subject and your interview this morning, what's the first step they should do in working with you? Well,
they should reach out. Find me on my website. You can send me a message through my website and say, this is what I'm interested in, or I want to get more information about, and leave your phone number and I'll call you and we'll set up a 30-minute complimentary phone call just to explore where you're at, what your questions are. The whole scope of, your situation, and we'll go from there figuring out a plan.
Well, thank you so much for being our guest today.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you.
All right. That's going to wrap up Silver Solutions Radio.